I am writing this report at filing station 7 because my primary office terminal is currently displaying an error I have not seen before, and I do not want to ask the technicians about it until I have decided what to tell them. The assessment was booked as routine. That is the first thing I want on record. Standard cognitive stress evaluation, diplomatic corps clearance track, human embassy liaison staff. Mandatory for all non-C-Thrani personnel assigned to the consular interchange program. I have administered 417 of these assessments in 11 years. The instrument array has never produced the error it is currently displaying. I want that on record as well. The subject arrived at 900. Her name is in the attached intake form. She was 34 years of age, 11 years of service in the Human Diplomatic Corps, currently assigned as a senior trade documentation liaison. She had a small bag with her. She set it on the floor beside the assessment chair and sat down without being asked and said good morning. Her baseline neurological readings, taken during intake, were unremarkable. Slightly elevated cardiovascular rate, within human normal range, according to the reference sheet I had requested from the Human Medical Registry before the session. I should note, because it is relevant, that I have assessed 2 other human subjects in the past 3 years. The first was a human security consultant, male, late 40s, applying for restricted access clearance. He reached threshold 2, performed adequately, and was cleared without incident. His stress response curve was unusual in that the inflection point arrived later than average, but it arrived. He showed stress markers. They were within range. I filed his assessment without difficulty. The second was a human junior cultural attaché, female, mid-20s. She reached threshold 3 before her curve inflected. That was notable, only the second non-C-Thrani subject in the office's history to reach threshold 3. Her stress markers at threshold 3 were mild. I flagged it as an outlier in the quarterly summary and assumed it was the outer edge of the distribution. I mentioned both of them because I wanted understood that I was not unprepared for the possibility of an unusual result. I had a framework. I had context. I want the record to show that I arrived at this session with an appropriate professional baseline, and that what followed was not the product of inexperience. I explained the assessment procedure. It is a standard explanation. The instrument array will introduce escalating cognitive load stimuli, beginning at low intensity and rising through 4 calibrated thresholds. The assessment measures the subject's neurological stress response curve. Clearance is issued at threshold 2 or above. The session ends when the instrument array identifies the subject's functional ceiling. Most subjects reach their ceiling somewhere between threshold 2 and threshold 3. Threshold 4 has been reached by 6 subjects in 11 years, all of them C-Thrani military personnel in the top performance tier. No subject has ever exceeded threshold 4. The instrument array is not calibrated beyond it because there has never been a need. She listened to the explanation. She nodded. She asked how long it usually took. I told her most sessions ran between 22 and 35 minutes. She said that was fine. She had a meeting at 11 and settled back in the chair. The array began at 9:07. The first threshold presents a sustained cognitive load environment. Simultaneous processing demands across 3 channels, competing informational inputs, a low-grade decision pressure sequence. For C-Thrani subjects, threshold 1 produces a measurable stress response curve beginning at the 4-minute mark. The curve's inflection point, the moment the neurological load registers as pressure rather than background noise, typically occurs between minutes 6 and 9. I have a chart. The subject's stress response curve at minute 4 was flat. At minute 6, it was flat. At minute 9, when I would normally be watching for the inflection point, she was reading something on a small handheld device she had taken from her bag. She noticed me watching and said she hoped that was all right. She was just catching up on some correspondence. She said the hum from the array was quite soothing. I made a note. I let the session run. Threshold 2 begins at the 12-minute mark. The competing informational inputs double. A time pressure element is introduced. The subject must track a decision sequence while managing the existing cognitive load. For C-Thrani subjects, Threshold 2 produces visible autonomic stress markers within 90 seconds, elevated respiration, increased micro-movement, the particular quality of stillness that indicates effortful concentration. For 4 of the 11 other species I have assessed in this office, Threshold 2 produces the session-ending cascade. Executive function narrows, the decision sequence falls apart, and the instrument array logs the ceiling. At 14 minutes, the subject put the handheld device back in her bag and looked at the display panel in front of her. The decision sequence was running. She worked through it. Her respiration did not change. Her micro-movement indicators were lower at Threshold 2 than they had been at Threshold 1. I checked the calibration. The array was functioning correctly. She was simply quieter under more pressure than she had been under less. I have a note in my records from a senior assessor I trained under 15 years ago. He told me once that the stress response curve is not a measure of weakness. It is a measure of biological honesty, the body's truthful report of what the nervous system is experiencing. Every sapient species has the curve. The shape varies, the existence of it does not. I thought about that note at the 14-minute mark, watching the subject's curve refuse to inflect, and I did not find it as reassuring as I once had. Threshold 3 begins at the 20-minute mark. I want to be precise about what Threshold 3 is because I think it matters for this report. Threshold 3 is not simply more load. It is a qualitative shift. The competing inputs become contradictory. The subject is receiving information streams that cannot all be acted on simultaneously, that actively interfere with each other. The time pressure element tightens. A noise component is introduced, non-informational sensory input layered over the decision environment. The effect on C-Thrani neurology is described in our training materials as a temporary experience of cognitive dissolution, the sense that the environment exceeds the capacity of the processing architecture. It is not pleasant. It is also, our training materials assure us, entirely safe and temporary. I administered Threshold 3 to a Vithari military attaché 2 years ago. He described it afterward as the most unpleasant experience of his professional life, and he had served in 3 active conflict zones. The subject at minute 21 asked, conversationally, whether the noise component was meant to be distracting or whether there was something wrong with the equipment. I told her it was intentional. She said and returned to the decision sequence. At minute 24, her decision sequence accuracy was 91%. The reference ceiling for Threshold 3, the performance level above which the instrument array is not designed to evaluate, because no subject has reached it under Threshold 3 conditions, is 70%. The array escalated automatically to Threshold 4 at minute 26. This is a failsafe function built into the system. If a subject's performance metrics exceed the threshold ceiling, the array moves to the next level. It has activated twice in 11 years. Both times were C-Thrani military subjects. Both sessions ended within 4 minutes of Threshold 4 onset at the array's functional ceiling. I watched Threshold 4 begin, and I want to record, for the accuracy of this report, that I felt something at that moment that I would describe as professional apprehension. Not about the subject, about what I was going to have to write afterward. Threshold 4 is, I will be direct. Threshold 4 is the assessment equivalent of cognitive siege conditions. The contradictory input streams multiply. The time pressure becomes acute. The noise component intensifies to levels that, in our training documentation, are described as equivalent to an active emergency environment. The decision sequence branches into cascading conditional chains. The instrument array is measuring, at this point, whether anything remains of executive function under conditions designed to overwhelm it. I have administered Threshold 4 3 times in 11 years, twice to the C-Thrani military subjects I mentioned, and once to a Dravathi Special Operations officer applying for Joint Command clearance. The Dravathi officer lasted 2 minutes and 40 seconds before the array logged her ceiling. She was, by any standard, an exceptional performer. Her debrief afterward was composed and professional. She told me, with complete evenness, that she hoped she never experienced anything like that again. The instrument logs from those 3 sessions all show the same shape: a rapid climb in stress markers, a plateau, and then the ceiling event. The moment the executive function readings drop sharply as the neurological load exceeds the architecture's capacity to process it. The ceiling event is unmistakable. It looks like a cliff edge on the chart. At minute 26, I was watching for the cliff edge. At minute 30, I was watching the overflow flag. At minute 35, I understood that the chart was not going to show me a cliff because the subject was not approaching one. The subject tilted her head slightly to the left. She did this. I have since reviewed the session recording 4 times during threshold 4. It appeared to be a thinking gesture. At minute 31, she said, without looking up from the display panel, "I don't suppose you have coffee." I told her I did not. She said that was all right. She should probably cut back anyway. At minute 38, her decision sequence accuracy was 88%. The threshold 4 ceiling, the maximum performance metric the instrument array is designed to register, is 62%. The array had been displaying an overflow error on my secondary monitor since minute 33. I had not told her. I was not certain it would mean anything to her. At minute 41, I ended the session manually. This is within my authority as the assessing officer. The instrument array, which ends sessions automatically when it identifies the subject's functional ceiling, had not ended it. The array had not found the ceiling. I ended it because I had been watching the overflow error for 8 minutes, and I had begun to feel that continuing was not producing useful data so much as it was producing a longer record of the same finding, which was. I did not know where this person's ceiling was, and the instrument array did not know either, and we had run out of thresholds to look with. She blinked when the array powered down. She said, "Oh, are we done?" I told her she had cleared the assessment. She said good. She hadn't been sure what to make of the noise component. She said it had reminded her of her office on a busy afternoon. She picked up her bag. She thanked me for my time and said she hoped the equipment was all right since some of the indicators had looked a bit unusual. She left at 9:52. I sat at the assessment station for some time before I came to filing station 7 to write this report. The instrument array is displaying 3 errors I do not have documentation for. I have photographed them. They are attached to this report as supplementary exhibits A, B, and C. I have completed the assessment form. The subject is cleared. Her performance at every calibrated threshold was above the clearance standard. That field was easy. The cognitive stress ceiling field is blank. I have a protocol for blank fields. They require supervisor sign-off and a written justification. My written justification is this report. I am aware that the justification is unusual. I would like to note, for whoever reads this, that I did not make an error in administering the assessment. The array was calibrated correctly. I have the pre-session logs. In the notes field, I have written the following. Instrument array has reached its calibrated upper boundary. Recommend engineering review of threshold 4 ceiling parameters before next Human Diplomatic Corps assessment. Recommend this in the strongest available terms. The field for subject response to assessment environment has a drop-down menu with 11 options. They are acute distress, moderate distress, mild distress, neutral, mild engagement, moderate engagement, active engagement, high engagement, peak engagement, and 2 clinical terms I will not reproduce here that indicate session-ending responses at the severe end. I sat with that drop-down for 4 minutes. I selected neutral. It is the most accurate option available. She was, as best I could measure, untroubled. The noise component reminded her of her office. She wanted coffee. She had a meeting at 11. I do not know what her ceiling is. I know it is above threshold 4. I know the instrument array cannot find it. I know she has been doing diplomatic corps work for 11 years, which, if I understand the nature of that work correctly, means she has been operating in conditions of sustained complexity and competing pressure for 11 years. I think about that. And then I think about what Threshold 4 felt like to the Vithari military attaché, who described it as the worst experience of his professional career. And then I close the form. I am going to ask the technicians about the array errors in the morning. I have decided I will tell them the session ran long. That is accurate. I will tell them the subject was a high performer. That is also accurate. I will not tell them that I ended the session manually because I had run out of thresholds and the array had run out of ceiling and the subject had run out of nothing at all. Some things I have found are easier to file than to explain.